Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we will dive into a very exciting topic, from HR complexity to business impact, building the case for a modern people operating system. This session is eligible for HRCI, SHRM, and ATD professional development credits. Now let's meet today's speakers.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Ken Matos. I'm the director of the Insights Lab at HiBob. My background is as an organizational psychologist, and I've spent the last almost 2 decades focused on what makes the workplace tick to draw out the best experience for employees and the best performance for businesses. And at HiBob, I focus on what's going on in the HR universe to help us build better products to help you help your employees.
Hi, I'm Tom Pearson. I'm Director of People for 27 Tech Group, which is a UK business in the finance sector. My background is in operations management and HR management. And I guess my specialty really would be around working with small businesses, SMEs, to transform their HR operations.
Thank you so very much, gentlemen. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Marline C. Duroseau. I do go by Dr. Mar for short. I am Managing Director of HR and Leadership Development here at Brandon Hall Group. And I'm excited to moderate today's conversation because we're going to explore a challenge that many HR, finance, and business leaders are facing right now. And that's organizations have more workforce data than ever, but many still struggle to turn that data into clear, fair, and timely business aligned decisions. So I'm so excited to join today and moderate as the Managing Director of HR and Leadership Development with Brandon Hall Group.
Thank you, everyone. A huge shout out to today's webinar sponsor, HiBob. HiBob is the company behind Bob, the modern HR platform that helps organizations streamline people operations, improve employee experiences, and drive business growth. Built for today's dynamic world of work, Bob connects HR, managers, and employees through a powerful people-first platform. Please be sure to visit them at www.hibob.com. Now, before we dive into today's content, let me tell you about Brennan Hall Group and some incredible opportunities that could accelerate your career. Brennan Hall Group is a leading professional development firm that has been serving learning, talent, and HR executives worldwide for more than 30 years. We've advanced the growth and performance of millions of employees and leaders through our cloud-based platform, delivering evidence-based research, data, and certification programs that empower organizations to achieve excellence in every area of human capital management. Our impact spans more than 10 million employees and executives globally, supported by our comprehensive research library, strategic insights, and prestigious awards program. Below is a sample of the organizations we are proud to partner with. We have incredible learning and networking opportunities. Our 2 BRIC events happening later this year, our AI Summit on October 15th, and our Leadership Summit on November 17th and 18th. And don't forget to save the date for next year's 2027 HCM Excellence Conference happening January 26th through the 28th. All details for everything I've mentioned will be available in a PDF you'll receive within 24 hours after this webinar. Now, I would like to launch a poll question based off everything I just went over. What would you like to learn more about? Is it our Eminence program, our awards program, 2027 HCM Excellence Conference, or maybe it's one of our BRIC events? I'll leave this up for just a few more seconds. Thank you everyone for responding. All right. We are excited to share that at the end of today's webinar, we will be selecting one lucky raffle winner to win $100 off a Brennan Hall Group Institute membership. Stay tuned to see if you are the lucky winner. You must be present to win. Now, just a few quick things to note. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use the questions panel on your control bar. We'll be answering them throughout the session. We're also recording today's webinar, and you'll receive an email within 24 hours with a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides. The chat box is open, so feel free to share your thoughts as we go along. Your input makes this more valuable for everyone. Now I'd like to pass things off to Dr. Mar.
Thank you so very much, Ivy. I truly appreciate that, and I'm sure our attendees did as well. Let's move right into a poll question that directly sets up today's conversation. And on the screen here, we would like to know which description best fits your organization today. So you may be in a reactive or ad hoc environment where HR is still largely manual, fragmented, and focused on urgent administration. You may be standardized, where core policies and systems are in place, but integration is still a little limited. The next option, you may be defined or strategic, where HR is aligned to the business goals and integrated into your decision making. And finally, you may be optimized, where HR is a proactive transformation partner using advanced analytics and automation. So there is no right or wrong answer here. This is just simply a way to reflect on where your organization is today as it relates to HR. So we'll keep it up. Thank you so much for answering. Good. So it looks like we're tied between standardized and defined strategic. And this is very, very helpful because it really shows a reflection of the market right now, where organizations are in different stages of their progression, which is why having a maturity lens is so useful when it comes to trying to figure all of this stuff out with HR. So let's connect that poll to a broader Brandon Hall research. So one of the clearest Brandon Hall Group findings is that only 39% of organizations report that their HR metrics are in alignment with their business results. So, that tells us something very, very significant and very important. It tells us that the issue is not only usually that organizations have no data. Many organizations have plenty of data. The issue is that it's not always connected or usable or aligned in a manner that will help decision makers and leaders do what they need for the organization. So when organizations say that they're data driven, the next question should be data driven towards what exactly, right? So
Yes.
if HR metrics are not connected to specific business outcomes, then leaders, they're still left trying to interpret all of this information that they have. And they're also left to try to defend any decisions that they're making or make choices without having the full picture here. So that's where the real gap is. It's not that we're unable to collect or organizations are unable to collect data. It's how is it aligning with the business? And Ken, I don't know if you wanted to add a quick line or two as it relates to this particular information that we were able to point out.
Yeah, I think one of the things that a lot of people get wrong is they focus on metrics, which are generally just counts. What you really are looking for are relationships. You want to see how, as one metric changes, your key outcomes are changing in tandem. That's where the real value is, because that tells you what you need to do in order to drive your outcomes forward. And if you don't have that connection, if you don't have the technology to make your data make sense and to talk to each other, you just end up with a bunch of disparate numbers that you report regularly, but that nobody feels particularly excited about.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for adding that additional context. Tom, I wasn't sure if you wanted to add something as it related to that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's so important to have that connection between different sets of data in particular, but also I think one of the most important things, certainly for us at 27 Tech, that we realized is you also kind of need alignment in defining what you're trying to do with that data. So, for example, not long after 27 Tech had secured some private equity investment, we redesigned our whole board pack to be a little bit more sort of grown up for this new board of directors that we had. And we very quickly realized that whilst I had HR data that was very similar to what finance was reporting, we were actually coming out with two different stories effectively because we hadn't actually aligned on, what are we trying to tell these people? So we kind of went off in two different directions, and I think you have to kind of think of that alignment in two ways, both sort of alignment of data and alignment of intent as well.
That's fantastic. I love the way both you and Dr. Ken tied in real life examples because that is sometimes what happens. We have all of that data and we're all looking at technically the same information, but getting different insights and what does it mean and what do we do with it and what direction do we go?
Yeah.
So thank you both so much for adding additional insight to that. And our next slide here, Brandon Hall Group's human resources progression model, we show that 55% of organizations are operating at strategic, okay, or optimized levels, while 45% remain in the first two phases, so earlier on in the progression model. And what we found that that means is that the market is moving forward, but organizations are still building the operational foundations that they need in order to move from that fragmented administration to integrated business aligned HR operations, like we've heard Dr. Ken and Tom mention. And that's a key point for today's conversation because organizations, they don't move into strategic or optimized HR maturity simply because they have more technology. Okay, they progress when the systems, which is the technology, the data, the governance, and the processes all work together and allow decision making to be able to be optimal for the company. So while some organizations are already operating as strategic HR partners, you find where many are still working through the friction of having that disconnect with their systems, inconsistent processes, and limited decision support. Next here, we are going to talk about how organizations, they do not move into the strategic or the optimized level for the HR maturity just by having additional features through that technology that we talked about on the previous slide. They are able to move through the progression through integrated systems, being able to have the capability to run their analytics efficiently, the governance that we talked about, and the data readiness. And all of this is a critical distinction because too often, or more times than not, transformation is talked about or discussed as though one tool or maybe a couple tools or maybe a feature is what's going to solve the problem, right? But in practice, in the real world, you find where if the underlying foundations are fragmented, then even though you have those advanced tools, they can only do so much. So ultimately, moving from phase 2 to phase 3, it requires integrated HR systems, analytics capability, and of course, HR governance. And having that clean, integrated data is the foundation for effective HR implementation. So the message here that we want to get across with this particular slide is that foundations must be built before advanced HR technologies can even deliver the value that they're ultimately trying to get across. And Dr. Ken, I don't know if you wanted to add a couple points or as it relates to that as well.
I like to think of a lot of traditional HR as being very focused on creating raw materials. And so it's going out and building all of this storage for the wood that you're going to build this building out of. But there's been a traditional sort of gap in moving from we've assembled all the metrics, we've assembled all the foundations to what are we actually going to build with it? And how we set ourselves up to move the wood from that storage pen to the actual building site in a clean and consistent way, not have some stuff fall off the truck or get confused. And so I think what you're pointing out here is really key of like think about how you set up that foundation. You acquire those raw materials and make sure they're quality, but that also has to then lead naturally into what are we actually going to build with it? And did we even collect the right raw materials for that? See, a lot of times organizations go out, they get data, but that data isn't actually, as Tom pointed out, matched to purpose. And so they did a lot of work, but it doesn't amount to anything. And so you almost have to start with a vision of what your late stage is going to be to make sure that your early stage work is worthwhile.
I really appreciate you mentioning that. And one of the ways I can kind of sum that up, because this is exactly what came to mind when I heard you say you have to know what the vision is. It's part of the leader in me that
Mhm.
oftentimes they're teaching now in school with the students, where one of those principles is to start with the end in mind. So you have to already know where you're going, what it is that you're trying to accomplish, get so that your foundation can be built appropriately so that you can get the value and the results that you're looking for. So thank you so very much for adding that input, Dr. Ken. And ultimately, when we narrow down the conversation to HR and finance and the decision support that's needed to make sure that both departments are, in simile with each other, the gap becomes even more visible, okay? Because only 2% of companies are reporting to having access to a unified HR and finance dashboard today. And we see how, as the example that Tom gave, where finance is connecting data, HR is collecting data, a lot of it is maybe similar, but they're all saying different things, right? So at the same time, 61% say that having that dashboard that unifies HR and finance would help improve the fairness of the decisions that are being made. And 79% say that it would help them manage more fairly and effectively. So ultimately, the demand is there, right? The demand exists for this type of platform and this type of tool and technology. And the value is inherently understood, but the infrastructure is still not where it needs to be. And this is exactly why today's conversation matters, because when managers and leaders are making people decisions that ultimately have financial impact, they need timely, accurate, connected data. And without that, the decisions, they become slower, right? Because oftentimes
Mhm.
you may find where data is collected, and if you really have someone who's stringent upon making sure they're correct, they want to test it, they want to push back, they want until all of that takes time. So decisions become slower, they're less consistent depending on who's reviewing and what their process is. It becomes harder to defend because are we using or relying more heavily on finance data? Are we relying more heavily on HR data? So it makes it harder to defend. And ultimately, that sometimes leads to, decisions being less fair. Okay. So with that context in mind, I want to definitely pass things off to Dr. Ken and Tom, bring them back into the conversation. So we'll move into HiBob research and unpack what you gentlemen have found as the hidden cost of this fragmentation. Dr. Ken?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think a lot of this needs to be put in the context of what's happening in the world today, primarily around an obsession with speed that has been triggered by the advent of AI, but also a desire to distribute a lot of HR activity back to the line in terms of the managers doing work rather than having it come into a centralized center of excellence. And we wanted at HiBob to explore what that really meant when you said managers you now need to make these decisions that have to take into account financial and HR policy and guidelines and create decisions that are both motivating to employees, but are also respectful of the budgets that organizations need to adhere to. And so one of the things we found was that there actually is some real problems created by not having HR and finance be unified at that deep data level, not just for those two departments, but in ways that ripple throughout the entire organization. So if we continue on, we can talk about the data collection just very quickly. We did a survey with census-wide in several regions, Australia, New Zealand, Benelux, Canada, the DACH region, Nordics, US, and UK, so much of Europe, ANZ, and North America, of over almost 5,000 people. So this is not a small study. And everyone was a manager with at least one direct report and was making decisions that had both financial and personnel impacts. And so one of the big things we found was that about 61% of employees who participated in our survey, as you can see on this slide, um, next slide, said that the permissions or privacy rules were limiting access to the data they needed to make decisions. So people were saying, be holistic, have a big vision of like what's going on in the business and make these deep decisions, but I can't actually see the information that those decisions should be based on. And so it's so surprising that on the next slide we see that only 60% of people that 60% of people spend an average of 3 hours stitching data together across all those systems before they make a decision. Now, I want to really be clear. This is not 3 hours to make a decision. This is 3 hours just to collect the information to begin to make the decision. So there's time on top of this that they're reviewing that, deciding on what to do with it, and like making sense of what where they're going to go with it. So there's a huge just time suck that's happening. Now, in our current environment, some people might say, fine, that's an employee problem. How does this affect the business? Well, aside from the fact that those people just are working longer and probably are slower, we found some other really disturbing details in the next slide. And so, one, we found that when there was friction and a deadline, there was a lot more guesswork. So 62% of people said they leaned on an educated guess rather than miss a deadline if the data was hard to get their hands on. So you have almost two-thirds of people saying, meh, and just shoving something through the door because a deadline was looming in their face. That's not really great policy. But more importantly, perhaps that's still at that one person, perhaps at the particular levels of the decision, but then it would spread because we found that about three-quarters of decisions were formally challenged or appealed. And that means someone spent 3 hours stitching data together, made a decision, tried to act on that decision, and then someone swooped in and said, I don't know about this decision, explain it to me, prove it to me. So you wasted even more time, likely because that peeling person didn't have the same data view. So what you decided probably seemed crazy until you stitched it together and then explained it to them and showed it to them from your perspective, which is just more time suck, but it's moving up the ladder and affecting more senior people as you waste time with these kinds of appeals and questions. And so fragmented data was affecting the individual. It also shows signs of potentially being really damaging for the business. Um, Tom, you had said that you had some experiences that your
Mm.
organization and your career that sort of emphasized some of the problems that happen.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's a very familiar problem, particularly with a lot of smaller businesses. But I think even larger businesses that that grow very quickly can find themselves in a position just like this. So, for example, 27 Tech, we have a pay review process at the end of each year. And when I joined the business, the process was essentially um, completely manual. So we would have um, probably 10, 12 different spreadsheets that would be sent out to each departmental head. And they would have conversations with their individual line managers, and they'd kind of cobble together a proposal for pay increases based on them having to go and find performance data. They'd have to go and look for salary benchmarking data as well, which was also all stored in spreadsheets. So we kind of had to work around that as well. To your point about permissions stopping people from getting that information. Well, all of our benchmark salaries were all in one big spreadsheet. I can't give that to everybody so everybody can see everybody's salaries, just can't do it. And that became not only really arduous, but really sort of limiting in that decision-making process. Because as you say, if you've got a department head who's got 25, 30 people underneath them, are they going to spend 3 hours stitching that information together to make a decision across 30 people? Or are they going to go, I'll give them 3 grand and hope they're happy? They then start to do that guesswork, and that presents massive risk around pay discrimination, general unfairness, employees becoming upset or disgruntled about what they get because it's not based on anything from a data perspective. So actually, we started to use HiBob's compensation module, which was absolutely transformative for us because it took all of those disparate pieces of data and put it together into a really structured framework, to the point where, our pay reviews for the entirety of the business now take, I don't know, maybe a couple of hours, something like that for each person. And it's so much easier and it's defensible and it's got an approval process to go through because people trust that data in the background now.
Yeah, I live a similar experience. We use our modules internally and just doing my own performance reviews for my team and salaries, being able to like hold them next to each other and be like, why am I giving this person this money and this person this money? And just
Yeah.
having that be neat made it really simple to walk into performance reviews and explain what was happening in a way they're like, okay, great, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And just much easier than trying to wing it after the fact when they ask, and you're like, oh, I
Yeah.
actually was kind of fuzzy on that.
Yeah. It's too late by that point, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And so Tom's experience and mine is not unique, as a number of our respondents on the survey said on our next slide. There were some really big problems that happened when you had fragmented data, whether that be, a deserving candidate not getting the right pay hike, and then leaving, two people being hired for the same role, or not, or giving somebody the wrong pay percentage based on their performance, as they were being promoted, are all great examples of where when the data is not clean and aligned and integrated, you do things that people on the back end see very clearly as like, this doesn't make sense. It doesn't line up with the stuff that's going on, and you have to explain it, or it's just a straight up mistake, like hiring two people for the same role. And so this is what happens when you don't have unified headcount and hiring plans and knowing when those roles are going to arrive versus when you've actually budgeted the salaries for them. And so these kinds of problems exist not just at the HR and finance level, but all throughout the organization and all the other people who rely on the employees who are either being compensated by this information or directed by this information. And so um, I don't like doing research that doesn't include some questions about sort of where do I go from here? And so we also asked some of the questions about what were the biggest issues in creating these problems. And so on the next slide, you can see five top blockers for these decisions. The first being conflict between people and financial goals. So I think a lot of times HR and finance have a different angle on the same decisions and they don't necessarily integrate. I had one experience at an employer where we were told to evaluate people from a developmental perspective. So their performance reviews were much more focused on their gaps than their strengths. And then finance came along and said, great, well, I guess we're not giving them a lot of big raises. I'm like, whoa, 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 wait a second. The HR guidance was about not talking about their strengths. If you're using their strengths to define their salaries, we have a problem here. And so moments like that create real issues for organizations and for the managers who have to try to keep employees confident and engaged that their work is going to be rewarded. We also saw comments on inconsistent process and metrics across teams. So I got that memo, but other people didn't. And so they still talked about the strengths. And so their teams were getting promotions, which created other problems. Um, Time constraints, as we saw before, when people are pushed for a deadline, but the data is not really available, they start making less than appropriate decisions. Uh, and that's all, these three things are often because the data is unreliable. If you're putting it in spreadsheets, I remember doing data cleaning and having to ask somebody why there were letters in a number field. And it's like, this is supposed to be social security numbers, but there's a bunch of letters in here. What's going on? And unclear metric definitions. So if you did somebody hit goal or not hit goal? Do I take into account that their region's experiencing a drought right now, so they don't have any particular interest in buying hoses? Does that make them a bad salesperson, or is that just an environmental thing that we gloss over? How do I manage that? And so these are all areas that people really needed clearer guidance and support around. And the value of getting that is pretty large. As we see on the next slide, EY did some research which said that organizations that have strong HR and finance partnership that aren't experiencing those kinds of problems are 41% more likely to see double-digit EBITDA growth and 44% more likely to see higher employee engagement and productivity. For a long time I've seen stats like this, but it wasn't until I really did this study that I could see the ways in which that happens. So much of it being the quality of decisions that you make, the ways in which these decisions affect people's real lives. Imagine being hired for a job and being told, watching somebody else walk in and say, "We're both here for the same job. Which one of us actually is going to stay here and which one of us is going to go home?" Like, that is a huge engagement issue, not just for those two people, but for anybody in that company who finds out that that happened. And so people like to break money and engagement into two separate universes. They're all tied up together, really flip sides of the same coin. And so I think that it's really important for both HR and finance to realize that they're stewards both of the organization's financial success and of the success of the people that are in it, helping it achieve that financial success. And so when we asked people what they most wanted, it's unsurprising that the top two were clear finance guardrails. How much money can I spend? Can I have that upfront and clear so I can live within a budget? And then clear HR policy for edge cases. And so I think HR is really good at having policy. Where we sort of stumble is when it's situations like, what do I do when the region that that salesperson is selling in isn't uh, uh, as rich as it used to be? Maybe a bunch of businesses closed. I'm in an area that does a lot of agriculture, and we've had some weird weather snaps. And so a lot of people are not going to have their planned crops. What does that mean for performance reviews there? And then finally, once you know what you're supposed to do, the dashboard to be able to see what's actually happening so you can make an intelligent decision. Tom, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think the guardrails part was particularly important for us. Going back to my example about the compensation process that we would have, um, being able to empower line managers, like you were talking about, Dr. Ken, pushing those HR or traditionally HR responsibilities back to a line manager is really important, I think, in a modern business because the line managers are the people ultimately with that responsibility, but also they're closer to the people that they're managing and they should be involved in that decision-making process. But being able to put clear guardrails around those processes as well was really, really important to us. So again, when it comes to having integrated systems and all of that data working together to be able to guardrail that, kind of protect the business from any erroneous decision making that might happen because of people, because people make mistakes at the end of the day, don't they? And I think having those guardrails, but equally having the clear HR policy for when those guardrails stop you from making the right decision, is really, really important because there's always going to be exceptions, always an exception to pretty much every rule. So those two pieces for me are absolutely critical.
And I think that's one of the places where data really helps you when you're doing an exception, because you're right, there are moments that the standard process is just inappropriate for, but not being able to explain why is what triggers all the bias questions. Where if you can really clearly articulate, like this moment is different than all the moments before, it's so much
Yeah.
easier.
We had a situation actually when we were trying to work out scoring in performance management. We wanted to have a quantifiable output from our performance management because we wanted to tie it to things like bonus payments and that sort of thing. But what we realized was by empowering line managers to performance manage their own teams, people are generally quite inconsistent. And certainly, if you silo each department by itself, what you find is one person's 6 out of 10 is the equivalent to somebody else's 8 or 9 out of 10.
Yeah.
And so you end up with this huge disparity. And being able to put guardrails in place helps with that sort of thing, particularly if it's a sort of comparative tool that means that everybody can see a sort of big picture view and they can look at their own scores and go, well, hang on a second, I'm a massive outlier in all of my scoring that I've done. But there are going to be occasions where you want people to be able to say, no, this person is a 10, and that's where the edge case policies come in, to make sure that you can make that because it's the right decision.
Absolutely. And so the other thing that we looked at in this study that I think speaks to some of these issues and where we might be going in the future is the question of what should we be using AI for, and will people actually accept that? And so quite to my surprise, 87% said that they would use an AI companion to summarize relevant data and suggest options. They were very clear that they wanted to be able to override that AI should it, rather than have it make a decision. But the ability to have that stitching tax paid by the machine and not them was valued, particularly in three areas: finding financial and people risks. That's a lot of time that you spend that hopefully you don't find anything, but you can't tell if that was I've been running a really tight ship and things are going really well, or I just missed it. And so you spend a lot of time looking for things that may not be there. And that's a great use case for AI, especially at the manager level, to be able to look at their team and think about it in a different way. We also saw some issues around performance reviews. I think performance reviews is such an excellent place for AI opportunities, and not just in the generic AI is going to write my performance review, but being able to do things that you can't do because of privacy that help you do things better performance reviews. Like just being able to have an AI look through all the past performance reviews and flag what you're not talking about for this person, but also, hey, you're sounding particularly different from everybody else. Is that intentional? Like you're giving them a 10, but most 10 language and descriptions sounds like this. You're either underselling them or overselling them could be a really powerful calibration tool without ever having to see anybody else's performance reviews. That would be a really great thing to address some of what you're talking about, Tom, and the power of what an AI tool can do in performance, as well as just gathering data to justify what number you're giving them. And then finally is headcount planning. I think one of the places that HR really should be excited about getting more AI support is predictive analytics. That right now you need to have an expert, and generally the only people who are going to be hiring those experts are large companies. If you're a smaller org that doesn't have enough volume for advanced modeling or projections, that's a great place where AI tools can sort of step in and help a manager say, you know, if I'm pushing for this person, will they actually arrive in time to deliver the value that I'm looking for? Or should I just wait till the next cycle because, taking into account onboarding and ramp times and other issues, this model isn't going to work. And so I think there's a lot of places where we can help make the data easier to use across all those different silos that we've accumulated but not really connected, as well as just helping people do the legwork to get to the insight that feeds a decision. So never even getting into the conversation about AI making decisions, just AI as a data sorting tool is just huge advantage. And I think a lot of our respondents saw that. And so
If you may, Dr. Ken,
go for it.
because I'm intrigued by the stat, the 87% of the people saying that they would use an AI companion. And, with that, do you think they're really asking for that or agree with that as it relates to being able to do things just faster? Is it speed? Is it confidence? Is it consistency? Because that's a large number of people. So what do you think they're really asking for when it comes to everyone being in agreement or on the wagon to be okay with using AI companion?
At the end of the day, I think it is confidence.
Okay.
So like from reading some of the commentary, I remember comments that were just like an AI would be a more neutral person in
Okay.
some of these conversations. Because it doesn't like the employee, it doesn't dislike the employee. It can compare that employee against everybody else in ways that I can't. So like if I could see all of my colleagues' performance reviews and commentary, I could potentially say, of course, my person deserves a raise. This person did half the value and got twice the money, but I don't get to see all of this. An AI could potentially see all of that and come back and say, what Ken is offering is not consistent with what's being offered to other people in similar circumstances. So I think there's that piece. And I also think it is as we try, I think organizations are faced with a really complex conundrum, and that the desire to distribute decisions back to the lowest level involved in them, I think is an admirable instinct, both from an empowerment perspective and from a frugality perspective. But I think it runs into the problem of if you do that for everything, eventually it's too much stuff. It's like your kid comes home and says, "Don't the teachers ever talk to each other about when they're going to give tests? Because I have to study for 6 tests tonight."
All at the
They
same time.
all at the
Yes.
same time because the those demands aren't coordinated. I think that is a real thing that organizations need to either decide what they're really going to have managers do,
Yeah.
or they need to find a way to make doing that a whole lot more reasonable. I think these are the places where AI tools step in. And we did another study where we looked at managers versus ICs, and managers were much more bullish on AI than ICs. And I think it's because when you talk to an IC about AI, they hear their job's going to go away. When a manager hears about AI, they hear, oh my God, I don't have to do those
Yeah.
things anymore. I can go
Yes.
back to doing what I'm actually good at.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. My personal approach is that I tend to use AI for really speed and efficiency as primarily, but then I'm in a relatively small business. 27 Tech's got just over 100 people in it. I've got two people that work with me in the HR department. So I'm in a position, a senior position, where I've got to be strategic and forward thinking, but I've also got to do stuff. I've got to drive the actual work as well. So I tend to use AI. I have my own personal rule, which is I won't use it for anything that I don't know how to do myself, because I don't think we're quite at the stage where we can 100% trust AI output. So I feel like I need to be able to check that myself. So I need to be able to know how to do the thing. But if it's something that I know how to do, then I will absolutely leverage AI for efficiency. So, for example, we've been compiling a catalog really of skills, a skills matrix. And when we draft a new job role, we also draft a skills matrix to go with it. And we pick all of the skills out of the massive catalog of about 1,000 that we've got now. Now, I can do that in maybe 30, 45 minutes by reading the job description and then scrolling through and cycling through all the skills and working out which ones I want to assign. Or AI can do that for me in about 20 seconds, and I don't feel like I'm losing any value from it because I know I wrote all those skills and I wrote the job description. I know I can do it, but I don't need to do it. And
Yeah.
that's where AI for us in HR is really important.
Yeah. I really like to think about what people were flagging where they wanted to help is like, help me scale what I'm already expected to do in a
Mm,
way that is more manageable.
exactly
Um,
that. Yeah.
Are there other conversations about AI usage? Totally, it's for another webinar. But I think for this group of respondents, that was what was in their mind and why that number was so high. If I were talking to pure individual contributors who their job is their job, as opposed to managers who are almost always managing and an IC on top of it, it's a different conversation. They have a lot of stuff they'd like to let go of, where I think for a lot of ICs, they question, if I let go of this, what actually is my job?
Mm.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. What a great distinction there. That was great. Great. So I'd like to thank you both, Dr. Ken and Tom. This has just really been a practical and important conversation. And quite honestly, what I appreciate the most is that this discussion shows about how HR transformation is not just about adding more technology, which we touched upon. It's about building that operating foundation to have better people decisions and to make decisions that are faster, more fair, and more consistent across the line, and to have that be all aligned with overall business outcomes. And we're going to move into the Q&A section. And one of the things I know I wanted to get the Q&A started off with is a question for you, Dr. Ken. You know, for any organizations out there that are still operating with a fragmented HR and finance data, you know, what do you think the first practical step is that they should take?
If I were in that situation, I would target my reconciliation moments and I'd find the places that are most hairy. So HR and finance are talking to each other and they're finding that their numbers aren't matching. Where are the places where my numbers aren't matching? Is that an issue of the data input? Is that an issue of the definitions are different? Like why are we not coming to the same steps? I think that is the first and most important thing. Before you try to change anything else, just understand why you both aren't ending up in the same place, because that will enable you to have a unified definition of what good looks like, which enables everything else to be successful. As we said earlier, if you don't have a vision of the end state, you can't really build. That allows you to have an end state and start it with a very specific place that there's a lot of usually pain and discomfort that will motivate people to have the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that. And from that practical lens, Tom, how would you approach or let a company know who has fragmented HR and finance data, what first step they should take?
Yeah, I think so. We perhaps took a little bit of a unique approach, being the software company ourselves. You know, we talk a lot about the tech stack behind our software. So for the slightly less technical people, perhaps they might not understand that expression. But if you're using a service or a website, you know, take HiBob for example, take Bob, you get this lovely user experience on the front of it, but in the background, there's loads of different platforms and services and different databases and tools and things all working kind of interconnected in the background to produce that functionality that you're using. And similarly, we refer to the sort of connected platforms and tools that we use in HR as our HR tech stack. And we kind of think of it in the same way. When you're building a product, you don't cobble things together as you go. You start with what is it I'm trying to achieve? You know, what is this platform or service or product? What is its output going to be? What do I want it to look like? And then you work out what's got to be in that tech stack to produce that. And we did very similar things. I said we built an HR tech stack by thinking about what is the top level output that we want to be putting out. How do we collect? What data do we need? How do we collect it? And what tools do we need to get to that point? So again, much like Ken said, it's reverse engineering kind of what you're trying to do.
Numbers person, I would say we're backing into the number, right? You're starting with the end and backing your way into it to make sure that you ultimately get the result that you set out for. So for all the other Q&A, you can definitely feel free to please reach out to our panelists. You can contact HiBob directly. And we will be sending out a post-event survey. So any questions that come up, you can ask there as well. And I'd like to thank everyone again for joining us today. And a special thank you again to Dr. Ken and to Tom for a thoughtful and very practical conversation. Ivy, you can take it from here.
Thank you, Dr. Marr. I'm thrilled to share that Kim DuPoint has won $100 off a Brennan Hall Group membership to our institute. Congratulations, Kim. We'll be reaching out shortly with more information.
All right, so thank you so much again for joining us. As explained in the beginning, you will receive a PDF of the presentation and a link to the recording within 24 hours of us having hosted the webinar. And we truly hope that today's conversation and discussion, allowed you to have a stronger view of how organizations can move from HR complexity to business impact and building more integrated, just decision-making ready people operations, right? That will really help the decisions that you make empower and help the people that make up your organization. So thank you so very much again for joining us and being here today. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.